Hello and thanks for accessing these I'm Curious About videos. In this video, we hear from Reverend Libby Howe, who is the Congregational Support Coordinator for Peace and Justice Ministries with the Wisconsin Council of Churches. Pastor Howe was with us to talk about how to be Christians, not crocodiles. That was the name of her talk with us, but it's about how to have hard conversations around things that people typically think of as political or partisan, and how we can do that, but let our faith lead us and let our faith ground us in that. She brings up all sorts of great resources. Some of them are linked along with this video. So we hope you enjoy this video. You can use it for personal fulfillment, but also it's formatted in a way with questions at the end where you can pause the video. You can use it with a group at your church as well, and also taking into account the great resources that are linked with the video. So without further ado, I just want to let you get to that time. We hope you enjoy this rich conversation with Pastor Libby Howe. Really thrilled to welcome you to the next gathering around I'm Curious About, and tonight's topic title was chosen by Reverend Libby Howe, who's with us today, How to Be Christians, Not Crocodiles. And we're going to be talking about how in the world we have conversations across partisan divides and what that looks like as Christians. So I'm really thrilled to welcome Pastor Libby here. She was for many years a DEM in the La Crosse Area Synod, and so she was one of the people. DEM stands for Director for Evangelical Mission. It's the job title that I carry, and also what Libby did for many years. Before I started, she was one of those who taught me how to do this job. So I am deeply grateful that Pastor Libby is with us tonight, now with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, doing exactly this kind of work. So with that, tonight's going to be a little bit different than our normal setup because Pastor Libby does this in a bunch of different synods and has a lot of good information to share with us. We are going to go into breakout rooms a couple times, but if you have questions or things come up during the presentation, feel free to put those in the chat. I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat, and we'll have a little bit more open of a conversation partway through. So anyway, with that, Pastor Libby, thank you so much for being here with us, and we're excited to talk with you about this timely topic that was very much requested when we asked people what they would like to talk about.
Well, thank you. It is great to be here, and I have to thank the people at Mount Carmel Lutheran Church in Wauwatosa. Shout out there. Becky Yakes has joined the room as well, and she's a member there. They were very big in helping me develop this presentation, this workshop that I do, because they were asking for something like this with their adult forum. And so I have presented it there. It's a little different in the online version. The title of it, as far as Wisconsin Council of Churches is concerned, is Awkward Holiday Conversations, because we were thinking about folks getting together around the table and being in family groups that are not necessarily all of one mind about different issues and often don't have a lot of opportunities to be in one room together. And certainly during the pandemic, that became true. But as I was talking about this with Pastor Matt, we were together at a conference, and I started rolling around some possible titles, and that's the one he just said, How to Be Christians, Not Crocodiles. And the reference on that is, I love alliterations, so there's the C's, but crocodile is a reference, not that we don't love and appreciate the value and the wonderful creatures that crocodiles are, but crocodiles themselves are part of the reptile family. And one of the things you've probably heard of is a part of our brains called the reptilian brain, or the amygdala, which, if we let it, could drive all of our actions. But that would be, that's usually the most basic, most rudimentary, and emotionally driven, and I don't want to disparage emotion either, so I'm careful about that, but that is impulsive and not very thoughtful. And we as humans have the capacity to think beyond our amygdala, our reptilian, our crocodile response, and to be thoughtful and value driven, and to pause, to take time. We aren't just creatures of our basest instincts. So that's where the title, How to Be Christians, Not Crocodiles, comes from. And the hope is that as we approach this particular topic and talking with people across partisan divides and encountering moments that could and often do trigger strong responses in us, because these are things that really matter to us, that we have done some rehearsing or some practicing or some thinking about it before it happens, so that when it does, we have a more faithful response, a response that we can walk away from and say, I think that was the best way I could handle that, instead of wishing we would have said something or wishing we wouldn't have said something, which is, I tend to be on the second part of that. I'm somebody who wishes they would not have spoken. I find that I'm actually in the minority in groups when I'm talking about this, that oftentimes folks that are coming to presentations like this find themselves being very quiet and not speaking up and wishing they would have. So regardless of where you are, the hope is that through some of these, using some of these tools, you could come away from some of these conversations or be in these moments and be satisfied with the person you were when you had the opportunity to do it. So given that, I am going to share my screen and take you through a little bit of just where I'm coming from conceptually when I'm thinking about this. Before we get into the real practical stuff, I want to do a little bit of that. So, and I have to back up here. Hang on. I'm gonna get to the beginning. There's your little owl. I think that's one of the cutest little owls I ever did see. Let's see, I'm gonna let this tab go. I won't be able to see you while I'm presenting, but I'll stop occasionally and we'll have some opportunities for you to do some responses in the chat. And I want to hide this floating meeting control so you can see everything. I'm going to view. I just need somebody to tell me that you can see full screen what I've put up there. Can somebody unmute and say, yep, we can see it?
Looks great. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the place where, so this is a picture of the beautiful Cass Street Bridge in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which crosses from the city of La Crosse over to the Pettipone beach, so to speak, if rivers can have beaches, in La Crosse, across the main channel of the Mississippi River. And it symbolizes for me what we hope to do in these conversations. So one of the things I want to start out with is the assumption that when we're thinking about having a conversation about something, or we have that opportunity that we're going to do it instead of decide not to do it, it's because we have some sort of relational interest. We want to be connected to this person. So I'm not necessarily talking about somebody that you really don't have an investment in that relationship. So that's the first thing. And that interpersonal connection really is the key to driving the conversation. And so when I think about what's the priority or what's the motivating piece here in a conversation, it's to stay connected to this person in some way. And there's different degrees of what that connection could be, but it is to stay, what's gonna build the possibility for connection, what's gonna keep the conversation going, even if it doesn't end in this moment, which it probably, if it's a really good conversation, it will keep going. These are not one-off conversations usually. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. So on either side of the interpersonal connection bridge are sort of the things holding that up. And the first of those is, I like thinking in threes. And like I said, I love alliteration. So these three I's. The first is identity. So for Christians, we approach every interaction we have as baptized children of God, looking across at the person who is also a child of God, worthy, beloved, made in God's image. And so just holding on to that identity instead of getting caught up in any kind of demonization, or where we wouldn't see someone as a real live human being with feelings, with complex history, with hopes and dreams and fears, pain and grief that they're dealing with. So all of the things we would claim and want people to see as the identity we claim as baptized children of God, made in God's image, that's a significantly important thing when we come to these congregations or conversations. And then integrity. I love the word integrity because I think it has everything to do with integration. That's of course the same root, is that that our actions and our words would be integrated, so that we could be, like I said before, this is that the person I am when you're not watching and the person I am when you are watching are pretty much the same person. And the things coming out of my mouth and the things that I'm doing with my life are consistent. They have a consistent pattern. So integrity. And then I think it's really important before there's any conversation with someone across difficult subject matter or partisan divide, is that we're real clear within ourselves. We don't have to proclaim this to anybody else, but that we're real clear within ourselves what's our intention. And that intention, I hope, has to do with interpersonal connection and building a relationship, but it can also be other things. I would like, sometimes one of my intentions is that I would hear, that I would listen and really understand what someone else is saying to me, and that I would be able to say it back to them, like reflect it back. And I intend to ask for, insist upon the same mutual respective space for me to do that. That there's sort of the intention is that there's going to be a mutuality of sharing here. It's not going to be just one person railing or ranting, whether that person is me or the other. But where, my intention is that I would listen, and then that I would also be heard. Sometimes my intention will also be that if I feel someone is being disrespected or misunderstood in someone else's language, that I would kindly speak about a more kind or just way to talk about that. This often comes up in conversations around immigration because of the language we use that can be really dehumanizing around immigration. And so I will, so my intention is that kindness will be a part of this conversation. And so those are sometimes the intention is set within me, but then it materializes in the conversation as some boundaries or some asks, without, and this is sort of the art of the whole thing, without alienating who I'm talking to. Sometimes even to say, gee, when I hear you say that, it sounds like they're not even a person. Maybe while we're talking, if we could say, instead of using illegals, we would say undocumented immigrants or people who don't have citizenship. And honestly, if someone's already engaging in the conversation with me and we've gotten to that point, they're pretty okay with that. They don't push back too much at that. But if they did, then that might be an opportunity to talk more about that thing. It doesn't have to shut it down right away or at all. It could just be another opening for the conversation. And then on the other side, so I was talking through this with Pastor Matt earlier today, he reminded me that these 3 C's are the core values of the Greater Milwaukee Synod: curiosity, compassion, courage, and then I think collaboration was the last one. But I'm in 3s right now. So the other sort of posture to take, so while we're grounded in the I's, we are presenting with the C's: curiosity, compassion, and courage. And I believe that if those things are kind of there as the framework for a conversation, that it will go better than if it was not there. So there's also 3 Bible verses. Micah 6:8 is one that I just hold really tightly. And I had a little bit of a, I don't know, a eureka moment with this verse just a few weeks ago. And I'm like, should I be embarrassed about this? And I'm like, well, even if I am, oh, it's okay. I'm still going to tell people. I think there was a time, what I realized was that when the prophet says, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God, that is an all at the same time thing. I think there was a part of me that thought I could do justice and then I'd get to loving kindness and walking humbly later. Or I could love kindness and I'd do that at the expense of justice. But the idea of doing all of these all at the same time, I think is a wonderful way to imagine sort of, again, some guardrails for what would be out of bounds and in bounds when we're talking to someone, what's going to hold us in our identity and our integrity, or what's going to give us courage, that doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly are simultaneous pursuits. They're not pick which one you want to do this day. And then the greatest commandment, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I mentioned wanting to enter and leave a conversation feeling proud of yourself. I think it's even more important that we will have honored God in that conversation, that I did my very best to love God and to love my neighbor as I was talking to them and listening to them. And then in order to be heard, there really does have to be a genuine love, not just for those that we may be speaking on behalf of if we're arguing a particular cause, but for the person we're talking to and ourselves. So that love would not shut us down, but it would give us the power, the curiosity, compassion, and courage to be faithful and effective when we're communicating these things that are important to us. So I'm going to stop there. That's sort of a little bit of a dump. And I'm going to stop and stop sharing my screen and get to look at you again and ask you is this the whole group we have now, Matt? We're at 12, it looks like. Well, that is enough to, I think, go ahead, and if you have a thought, something that resonated with you or that was somewhat dissonant even, and you would want to share that with others, go ahead and unmute yourself and share what's on your mind.
I'll just say, Libby, I really loved the 3 I's and the 3 C's because it felt a little bit like a what and a how. Like here's the what of what grounds us, and here's the how we're going to behave in the conversation. Like the 3 C's would be the how.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really appreciated that framework.
Yeah, and that the I is for, the I, interpersonal connection, that's IC as well. And then I have to stop because I'm like, oh, now we're icy, and I don't want to be icy in these conversations. We don't want to go cold. So anything else that the folks are rolling around with? If not, we can keep going. That's okay.
This is Randy. I am sorry, for some reason I can't get my video to work tonight. So
that's okay.
Maybe it's living out in the boondocks, but the 3 C's was very interesting because I served soup at Redeemer this weekend and on Sunday, and we had extra people. So I was able to sit down and talk to some of the people that were coming there, some of the homeless, and to eating the soup. And even though the 3 C's, the courage was the last one, it sometimes takes a lot of courage to sit down and talk to the people that are there because you're afraid you don't know what to say. But the curiosity, I started asking some questions of the 4 gentlemen that were sitting at the table with me, and it was amazing how we talked about endings and new beginnings and stuff like that. So the 3 C's worked extremely well this past Sunday for me. So I really enjoy that part of your analysis.
Good. Yeah, for sure. Those are, if those were the drivers for every conversation, whether it was a difficult one or not, or you're just with somebody we didn't even know yet, those would, that would be great. Think about how we could learn more about one another with those.
Well, it was a little easier because some of the things, the struggles they were going through, I had gone through about 15 years ago. So we were able to kind of relate. And again, it took the courage to just sit down and kind of open up about myself.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I really appreciate the comment that you added toward the end about being kind of getting a frame of mind. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but talking about being proud of ourselves at the end of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That struck me. Because when I'm not at my best, I feel yucky after a conversation. And then I think of all the things I should have done differently, and there's regret. So maybe thinking on the front end, and really be intentional. I want to be proud of myself at the end. To me, that's a helpful way to think about going into something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, that's something that started to happen to me when I knew I would be walking into rooms when I was working in the Synod office, and I'd be walking into rooms where people were angry, or I was going to be facing something, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to fix the problem, but would I be able to walk away and say, I did the best I could, and that was enough. So so it's almost like a sort of shifting the metric of what will it mean to be successful in this conversation. It's not that someone's going to change their mind necessarily, or that I'm going to win or whatever. It's that by the end of the conversation, I'll like the person that I was, and that God would too. So I think what I'd like to do, let me go to, let's go back to sharing the screen again. I'll make sure that we're trying to get rid of this floaty thing. So this is a book. There's an author named Melissa Urban, and some may know her because she has written a book called About the Whole 30, which is a diet plan that looks at eating whole foods, and but she also has gone into this other world of boundaries. The book of boundaries, Set the Limits That Will Set You Free, is the title of the book. And she uses a stoplight motif to talk about how she has set boundaries in situations with her friends and her family. So that if somebody sort of pushes a boundary, the first response would be green. And that's the slide here says low risk. There's really no, everything in good faith still. It doesn't get into any sort of consequences or threat of any kind. It just sort of says you're pushing something here, and I'd like for you to stop, and then if people are respectful of that, that's the end of it. The boundary is set, and you can keep going. We'll talk about this in a more concrete way. Right now, I'm thinking of it and talking about it more abstractly. The next one is yellow. So if somebody still pushes that boundary, does not respect it, and this can certainly happen. In fact, I just spoke with my cousin who is literally dying. She's under hospice care, and her brother and her cousin came over to visit, and she specifically asked them not to talk politics, that she just really did not want that to be in the house while they were doing this visit, knowing this could be the last time she sees either one of them. And don't you know, they did it anyway. And she was talking to me about that. And I said, so what did you do? She said, I don't have the strength to push back at them. If they don't honor and respect it, I just have to go with that. And I thought, wow, that is just so sad that's how that ended up happening. She was just so disappointed with their lack of respect for that boundary. So it does happen that even when you've asked, even when you've said it, people still decide to push against it. If that does happen, and you're able to, or perhaps somebody else is able to, who is an ally and understands what you've said, sort of can put some peer pressure, that you would be, and this is where there's an elevated risk, you'd use firmer language. You would may indicate a particular consequence. If you don't stop that, then this is what I'm going to need to do. And that's setting a boundary. If this is while you persist, this is what I will do. So it's in their court to make that choice. And then the red, which is still kind, but the last reminder makes it clear that you're prepared to hold your limit, state the consequence plainly, and then do it. So had she been able to, she might have just said, I would like for you to leave. I mean, obviously she couldn't leave because she was, she's homebound and bedbound basically. But she would have asked them to just take it somewhere else, that they needed to leave. And she didn't want the visit to end that way, but had she had the strength or the will, that's probably what she would have done if she wasn't so weak right now. So this is a more concrete example. Some of my family members and I don't agree when we spend time. They're not shy about expressing their perspectives. They're entitled to their opinions, but I suppose this kind of commentary is unacceptable to me. Can I even set a boundary here? And Melissa Urban was, yes, you can absolutely set a boundary, especially if you know that conversation, because there isn't sort of an agreed upon framework for having the conversation like we were just talking about. Sometimes the best possible action when with family and friends is just to say, in order to preserve our relationship, we aren't going to talk about it. And I believe, although some people might feel challenged or like they're selling out, I believe that's an absolutely faithful way to be. If you're not ready to have this conversation, or you know that someone's going to get hurt, you don't have to have it. And I guess I want, especially those of us who feel an extra push about making sure we speak up, which is also true, that we're not in this to hurt somebody or doing this if we are not ourselves ready. I think about Martin Luther King Jr. when he was leading congregations of people that he would give sermons to before they would go out and do their direct actions. And the whole purpose of that was to ask them to prepare themselves emotionally, spiritually, physically for what was going to come. And if they weren't ready, he told them that they should not go, they should not do it, that it would actually hurt the cause, hurt the movement, for them to do it haphazardly or casually. So I just want to put that out there, that there's times when that's a very faithful decision to make. So this would be setting boundaries. Maybe this is one in this case. I know we don't see eye to eye, so let's just please agree to not bring it up. I really want to enjoy this visit with you, and I would love it if we could end and really have all had a great time. The yellow, if somebody does it anyway, would be stop. We agreed, so please change the subject, and then change the subject. And so then you're kind of, again, you're sort of garnering the support of perhaps some other people that maybe could help enforce the boundary. And then the red one, if you won't stop talking about this, we're going to leave. And of course, she reminds us that the only person that we can control is ourselves. So when it comes to making statements, sticking to I statements, if you're going to say that you're going to do something, only say what you're going to do, not what everybody else should do too. That you can't, if Jeff isn't going to stop, and I'm like, is there a Jeff here? I hope there's not a Jeff here. But if Jeff isn't going to stop, then I got to go. And here's the thing about that. that's not the end of the day. That might not feel good in the moment, but you don't hate Jeff. You don't, I mean, you may be disappointed in what's happened, but one of the things you could say is, I have to go. I mean, I'm sad that we have to go. We have to do this. We'll try again. I hope we could try again and do this better, so that it's not just this slamming of the door and in perpetuity, we don't talk, or that's like this awkwardness that lives forever. And again, that's when we're operating less reptilian brain and more just, this is just what I have to do. I have to do this for myself, for my family. And God bless you. I got to go now. And we'll try again, which is very different than, you've ruined my Christmas. I'm never coming back. I knew you would do this. I hate you. All the other things that can come out in those moments of real anger. So I like that boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are, I had a professor that helped us to see that, sometimes you ride the boundary or step over the boundary or within the boundary. Boundaries have some flexibility about them. I mean, maybe Jeff's having a rough day and you can get over it that day or whatever. But I feel like there's, again, if we approach this from a more rational place, it's easier to draw the boundaries that we need to have the moments we want with people, without, even if they're disappointing moments, they don't have to be forever and ever, amen, ending moments. Just go ahead, and I'm going to stop again. I'll stop talking a little bit there and let you reflect a little bit for one another. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms with I have 3 case studies that I'll share with you, and in your rooms, you can decide which one you want to work with. Any thoughts or questions? Things I said that you're sure that I'm Polly Sunshine and that would never happen?
I have maybe you've seen the slogan that I have seen in some social media that says something like, we can agree to disagree unless you are questioning my right to exist,
right,
as God made me, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So maybe you've seen that. I agree with that, and yet I agree with everything you said too. So I'm trying to think about where those things meet. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I had a seminary friend. So I came out in 2011. I went through seminary 97 to 2002 and did my first call in the closet. And because in the ELCA, it wasn't legal yet to be out and ordained. And so and then I was in the Synod office in 2009 when those changes were made, and was working with congregations to help them figure out if they were going to stay in the ELCA or leave. And so it was 2 years later until I felt comfortable coming out. And when that happened, I had a friend from seminary who contacted me and told me that she she did not agree with my choice of lifestyle, but that we could still be friends. And I told her kindly that I didn't think we could still be friends. And of course we had that option in a way that people in families may not have. So I get that there's a difference here. But I took to heart, Jennifer, what that meme says, because her understanding of me theologically, and she was very explicit about this, I wasn't making any assumptions, was that my my person, the who I am, is an abomination in the sight of God. And that I was choosing and am choosing and then am leading other people away from God. So there was just and then for her to extend, but I will still be your friend. See, to me, she had undone the possibility of being my friend through what she had already said about who she thought I was. And I know she was disappointed that I said we couldn't be friends. Partly because I think she wanted to believe she could have it both ways, that she could, and I don't think you can have it both ways all the time. And so that before I would jump to saying we can't be in relationship, which sometimes we do have to say, I just want to make sure that they really are telling you you don't have a right to exist, or they really are. I mean, is that, because sometimes I wonder if we jump to that too quickly because they've said a racist thing or they've done it, but they didn't mean to. Like, I want to give them an opportunity to tell me what they really mean or what they're saying. And if they come straight out and say, I don't think you should exist, or something like that, like my friend did, then I'm perfectly fine with saying we don't need to be in relationship together. So anybody else have thoughts on that? I think that's a really great question. That's tough. Certainly in families, that is, or it means the depth of our relationship just won't be able to go that far. I can be in a room with you. I can be polite. We can even sit next to each other and eat, but you're not somebody I trust. We aren't going to go, that's not the extent of our relationship. Andy, were you going to say something?
I was thinking about it. Just so many things about the boundaries thing. I had to learn at an early age with my Vietnamese brothers. So my first Vietnamese brother came in 1980. So, the wounds of the Vietnam War were still very fresh. And I don't know, hearing gook as a word that frustrated and annoyed me in a very white suburban town in Columbus, Ohio. I had to learn to say, that word offends me. Please don't use it around me. And then I had to watch my pacifist brother deck a guy on the soccer field because he called my brother a gook. And I was wondering, like, as the 8-year-old, like watching my, Dad, why did Robbie punch somebody, and, it's all of these experiences that we have collectively, awkwardly, and so forth. And now we're having them more and more openly. And so I'm just wondering, and it collides in congregations. So I'm curious as to the forum in which the church has these conversations, because the thing that I have experienced as a pastor is that I have a pulpit where I can use those opportunities, and my congregation members feel as if they don't, and so they will react and maybe overreact by walking out on a sermon or other detrimental things to the life of the church. Mm-hmm. So I hold those things in tension to say, yes, boundaries are important, but I think there are people in our pews that are seeking a pulpit for themselves as well. Mm-hmm. And so this causes distrust in what it is that we do as church.
Thank you. That's thought-provoking, because it might actually sometimes I think it would be easier for the pastor to have these words, say these things, not from the pulpit. So that would be sort of the pastors giving up that place of privilege and power so that there could be a more egalitarian space for people to have the conversation. But I also understand the call on pastors to not speak about things that need spoken about. What you've named is really important, not just in congregations, but also in families. And that's, of course, a power differential that is present and that is always at play. Having mutual conversations that are respectful is much easier when one person doesn't hold power over the other. And that's why what we can say with a parent or a child at this stage of the game is different than the conversation we can have with them at a later time in life. But that awareness, I think, is what's important. I don't think we should give up on the conversation, but especially for people who hold more power in an interaction, being aware of that and doing our best to lay it down for the sake of the conversation.
Yeah, and even the person I'm thinking of reacted to the statement and the things that came out of the 2019 church-wide assembly, especially regarding being a sanctuary denomination. Those words can be polarizing. Was one of the people who was struggling with those things, and in personal respect and conversation, simply said, this seems to me like we are following an agenda that I don't agree with. And my response was, well, let's read scripture and let's see what God has to say about immigration and refugees. And I was appalled that his response was, I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, okay, but the thing that we do as a church is to read scripture. So I think we're just at, like these colliding agendas. And when we speak justice and we speak peace, it seems like we are bent on one agenda politically or another. Yeah. And that safe space that used to be church where we could have those conversations no longer exists.
So we could get into this, but would you do anything differently in that moment?
No. And he eventually left our church, which was fine. And he told his side of the story, and then I had to share that story, and they're like, oh, we didn't know that part. And I was like, yes, well, this is the harder part, right? To say that we can have the conversation, but it can't be driven by anything other than let's listen to what God is saying.
Has any of you ever walked out on a sermon? If you did, this is a rabbit hole we could go down, but there could have been, even with the agenda you have of making sure we're guided by God, when he said he wouldn't do that, was he basically, did you ask him if he would continue to have any conversation with you or with others, or was that just sort of the line he drew and then he left?
Well, I think part of this is difficult because it was right after I returned from sabbatical, and we had a pastor for our sabbatical who probably pushed that aspect of the pulpit a little bit further than most people were comfortable. And so, just coming back, it was kind of holding tension with being open and also just recognizing that part of the boundary as church is that part of our job is to read scripture together. I don't know what else to say.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want, and I wouldn't want a pastor to abandon that. I would just
sure
want, but I think it's possible to before, let's see what God has to say about that in scripture, which could be viewed and heard sort of as a power move. Not only am I as the pastor who knows more about God and scripture, but now I'm going to pull out God and we're going to say what God, I mean, that there's a lot of, so I just want to know more about him, what's going on.
Well, I mean, so part of the boundary was that I said to him that we are not making this a political discussion, which he agreed with, which I was actually impressed because he was notorious for making it political when it wasn't.
So do you mean partisan?
Yeah, I guess that's more properly understood because Jesus was political as all get out.
Well, and we are, so that's a pet peeve of mine. So thanks, Andy, for letting me do that. But political, I mean, has become sort of this bad word. We don't want to be political. The problem is political just means how groups of people make decisions about how groups of people live together. That's what political means. So congregations are political, families are political, government's political, because we're all trying to figure out how to live together.
And the root being polis, being the city. So what is good for the city? Yeah.
Right. So partisan is the word that I really think is more important to use. We're trying not to be, and I think it's possible to not be partisan. I don't think it's possible to not sound partisan sometimes, because there are going to be resonances on both sides or all sides, however you define partisanship. There will be resonances with the views that we are able to discern from scripture and from our shared experiences as community. So we're not going to avoid not sounding partisan because that, but I hope that I'm pretty sure that at its very best, and I don't think either political party right now is at their very best, but at their very best, there have been some places of good and crossover with what we could say is Jesus. And I'm not both sidesing it. I'm just saying that if we're talking about people caring for one another and not being sort of, dependent on the out there's to do that, but on real neighborly love, that can sound, if my grandfather's day, that would sound very Republican. But and now if I start talking about immigration or, on a reasonable path to citizenship and taking care of the stranger, which the Bible's really clear about, then someone could say I sound like a Democrat. And I'm like, fine. Sometimes I'm going to sound like a Democrat because that's but that's scripture is what I'm really looking at. So one of the things I want us to do and get better at doing is speaking the values of scripture and having those good conversations. So I appreciate those thoughts, Andy. So the three case studies, let me go back here. One is, now you may have some case studies of your own. If you get into a group and you're like, okay, here's a situation, my mom, my dad, my kid, whatever, and you want to sort of workshop that situation instead of one of these, go for it. But here are the three that I have for you that your group can pick, or that you can say, gee, this sounds like something I would like to talk about. So here we go. So this one is these are all real. I solicited these from real life people that I know. So this is my friend who's the adult daughter and her mom. She remembers this from quite a long time ago. My mom and I were watching Oprah. Out of the blue, she says, I really don't want you to date interracially because I want to have beautiful grandchildren. So that's sort of an isolated event. But then another time it pops up at Thanksgiving, my family's talking about current events. I'm so tired of this racism crap, she said. And she was referring to Black Lives Matter news and protests, and meant she was tired of hearing about it. And I said, gee, so are all the Black and brown people living it every day. So if these two were to have a conversation, or if this was to what could she say? What could she ask of her mom in the conversation or before the conversation? Just think about, so if that's the one you choose, all of them, the question is, what would come next? Say they want to, you take for granted, they want to be in relationship with one another, but the daughter doesn't want to let these kinds of comments go unchallenged, and how to go about doing that. So the next one, this is actually my own. I am in this scenario, the lefter employee. It was a holiday staff gathering, small, close-knit church staff, and we were sitting around the table, and the boss says, did you see the tweet from so-and-so today urging people to be generous and kind? And the lefter employee says, wow, that doesn't sound like a Republican. That guy sounds like he has a heart. And that just sort of fell out of my mouth. So I'll just own that moment. And everybody else went silent. And the writer employee says, I'm a Republican and I have a heart. And then I said, because I was embarrassed and I was upset that but then I got defensive. Of course, you have a heart. We all know you do, but come on, you can't deny that the Republican Party as a whole right now is morphed into something pretty heartless. Just listen to how they talk about immigrants. It's all fear-mongering and dehumanization. I mean, you can hear that, right? And she started to cry and said, I'm not talking about the Republican Party. I'm talking about you saying I don't have a heart when you know that's not true about me. It really hurts when you say things like that. I'm a Republican and I try really hard to be loving to everyone. She got up and left the table. Her husband followed her into the living room and tried to comfort her. So what next? So you can workshop that, talk about what you might do next if you were me, if you were her, and what could that conversation look like that would be a lot, that could mend the brokenness that is there. And then the third one, this is complex familial relationship, multiple issues at play, guns, policing, racism, immigration, poverty. So she says, my family, husband and 2-year-old son was camping with my cousin and his family. At one point, he joked about taking out an annoying dog in the campground with the gun he keeps in his camper. So I'm gonna actually read, make sure there's a little more to this one that I didn't fit in there, but she said, to myself, I thanked God that my kid was too young to want to play with his kid in the camper, but I mentally bookmarked the conversation because he may want to play in the future and I won't allow him to. When it's necessary, I've thought about saying something like, I'm not comfortable with my kids playing in a space near guns. And that is just drawing a boundary. And I would imagine saying something to my kids like, sorry, kiddos, you have to stay outside. But how do I tell my cousin that his guns do not make me feel safer? They are MAGA Republicans and cops, and I want them to realize their beliefs harm members of their family. I'm married to a dark Black man from Africa who has experienced discrimination. I've heard my cousin express genuine fear of criminals, use words like illegals. They have expressed disdain for folks not like them and for poor people, saying things like they don't work and are lazy, which objectively isn't true of most poor people at all. They value independence and self-sufficiency. Oops. They work hard for what they have and they have every right to be protective of it. I should say his dad, so here's your opening, is a little less extreme, and we've had some conversations where he will push back and we will get to some common ground. I've liked that a couple of times. This has happened within earshot of my cousin, his son. So those are your 3 case studies. You don't do all 3. Come to a decision as a group as to which one. and just roll it around with each other for a little bit. What should happen next? So.
Sorry, we want to go back to our group. We weren't finished.
Good conversation, huh?
Absolutely.
Good. Anything you're dying to, I told Matt I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Anything you're dying to share about what was good about it, or or maybe what you'd keep talking about if you could?
Well, I think from our standpoint, it's just so much of uneducated, I hate to use the word ignorance, but people that grow up together in a certain community that don't have any friends of different color or different races or different religions. And it's just very difficult. They think their way is the only way. And it's kind of a struggle to try to get them to understand that somebody that doesn't look like you or goes to a different church is okay too.
Mm-hmm. Pretty hard. So
well, and I think that Becky was onto something at the very beginning, Randy. I don't know if you were there for that, but I think that that's where you start with that conversation about, can you share more information about why you made that comment, or you think that way, or what some of your experiences are that lead you to believe that. And that's always the tough thing, I think, really to get around with folks, is that we think that we're in the right, and they're wrong. There's a lot of gray area in between, and it's at what point do you, when you talk about boundaries, at what point are you drawing a line on a boundary for some of those conversations? Like I think the case studies were nice and they're good for family conversations, but when I think about my congregation and my membership and some of the conversations and the partisan divides we're currently having over things, I think, well, we don't want to lose any of those people, and those people are our family, but it's very clear that there's one side and there's a second side, and then there's people in between who don't want to get involved at all, so then what do you do with that, and how do we behave as Christians and not be a crocodile?
Does the language of all being Jesus's family fall flat? Does that not work? I mean, I'm genuinely asking that, because that's where I go immediately, Steph, when you say that, is like, but we are all, Jesus has us all. Like, Jesus hasn't given up on any of us. So why would we give up on each other?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Steph kind of hit it's the middle group that doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want to take one side or the other. Sometimes it's, it's the silent majority that we have to try to get to be a little more vocal.
That sometimes I wonder if a conversation with people that are different, and then we wouldn't come at it from sort of, how are we different in terms of our partisanship, but we would that we would actually spend some time coming together and figuring out what are our common values, regardless of where we land. So there's things beneath those, the expression of who we are. There's the core of who we are that are more alike. I do believe this, that are more alike than different. Where we so do you think family matters? Is it important to care for children? There's some things we should all be able to be like, yeah, that's a pretty important thing. But then when it comes to how we do that, that's where we differ. That's the, what does it mean to care? Does that mean we all have to write letters to the Senate, about the lunch plan that's being? No, maybe we don't, but you can, while I'm over here making sure Sunday school happens. One of the things I talk about is making space in our congregations for people to express. Remember that working for peace and justice, is one of the core 5 baptismal promises that we make. So, so should so there needs to be space for people to work for peace and justice in all the earth in their congregation. And so even if someone's working for peace and justice in a way that I would not feel comfortable, our congregation has to be large. It has to be a big enough tent for them to exist and to work that way. So I like to think of our congregations as being elastic on the edges, like being able to include, to make space, to put around folks to be able to express what they're called to and not feel, because what I've seen are people who are younger, especially, and we all talk about, we want younger, newer, more diverse people, right? So people who are younger, newer, and more diverse in our church are leaving our church to go work for peace and justice elsewhere. They're finding other outlets to do that because they can't do it in their faith-based community. And that makes me very sad. I would love to see there be room for, not that every church would agree on everything. The consensus model, I'm fine with giving that up for a while. We don't all have to agree on all the things in order to make space for people to respond and to live out their call. So I'm very passionate about that.
So are you saying get outside of the brick and mortar?
Pardon me?
Are you saying get outside of the brick and mortar?
And get inside it. I mean, I think it's both. I mean, I don't mind that people are finding their way to working for peace and justice in other places, but it saddens me that they don't see their church as a place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we have a Savior who cared a whole lot about peace and justice with folks. So and again, we make this promise that we will work for peace and justice in all the earth. And this is from another workshop I do, but will you bring your child to the Lord's Supper? Will you place in their hands the Holy Scriptures? Nobody argues about those things. Everybody's fine with that. But will you work for peace and justice in all the earth? That's the one that we're all gonna, like, pastor can't say anything from the pulpit, blah, blah, blah. We're like bound to do that. We promise it in our ordination vows. But anyway, don't get me. Oh, he put a quarter in it.
And we also promise to take care of the earth and all God created.
Right. You put a quarter in me. Okay, Pastor Matt, do you want to ask me some questions?
Well, I do. I want to ask you one key question that she and I talked about before, and that is, what are some of the other resources you found that have been helpful to you? Because I know in our previous conversation, you named a few things, and I thought, oh gosh, those would be really helpful for people to hear about.
I know, and I haven't talked about them yet. Okay, so the first one is a book called The Persuaders by Anand Giridharadas, and that is a big mouthful of a name, but I'm actually going to share my screen so you can see that. And this is the book that I love right now. So I'm not going to worry about getting all that's his slide. The Persuaders at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. And he spent a couple of years talking to people who spend their lives trying to help others see the world the way they see it, and to even act and behave toward achieving a new vision of a different kind of a world. So I'll talk a little bit about him in a minute, but I also want to name this woman, organizer and activist Loretta Ross. And I learned of her through the book I just told you about. Loretta Ross is organizer and activist, and she has a TED Talk, which I think Pastor Matt's going to put a link in the chat so you can pull it up and then stop it and go back to it when we're done. That is about calling people in instead of calling people out. Because calling people out is about shaming, is usually about embarrassing or humiliating, and it's oftentimes coming from a place of performative action. I want other people to see me being the most wokest person. So I'm going to call you out, and then everybody's going to think I am the best, and put all that away. She talks about calling people in, and that's a much more effective, slower, challenging way of bringing people along. And the real challenge is that we're kind of clumsy. So this book that I have by Anand, The Persuaders, that we're a little bit clumsy in how in the ways, the persuasive ways that we use to help ourselves and help others see the world the way we do, or the way we believe that would be good for all. So so you've got the Persuaders books, you've got the YouTube link. Can I talk a little bit more about the Persuaders?
Yeah, just do it, because like honestly, the conversation you and I had earlier, I think folks need to hear a little bit about like these 6 main points that you sent me. And I will, just so that you all know, we will, just like we have in the past with this video, we're going to post like the link to the TED Talk that I just put in there, a link to the Persuaders book, and some information from Pastor Libby.
And there's a study guide for the Persuaders book that I found, so that'll go into that. I sent you that, Matt. And then there's handouts of what I presented in my slides. And there's one handout that we didn't get to. Bye, Randy. Have a good night. There's one handout that I didn't get you, which is a very practical conversation guide for nonviolent communication. And it goes through 7 or 8 things to think about beforehand, and then how to even sort of script or imagine approaching a conversation with somebody. And I got feedback from doing this workshop a couple of weeks ago from a woman that said the day right after the workshop, she went and she did it with 2 different people, and she had great conversations with them. So it was nice to hear like, oh, this worked for somebody. So hopefully it will be helpful to you, but Pastor Matt will give you that conversation guide as well. So the 6 things, and you want to put the 6 things in the chat as well? Can you copy and paste those? The 6 things that Anand talks about, and gosh, he's a good writer. He's an even better speaker. He does have a tour coming on, but I'm listening to the book and also reading the book. Brene Brown did a TED Talk, or did a podcast with him, so you can go and listen to an interview with him as well. But the 6 things that he talks about in his book that gave me lots and lots of hope were, the first one is recognize that people who disagree with you are complicated too. So don't treat them as immovable monoliths. Like that, just because they've said this thing that you think is reprehensible, that does not define who they are. There is a lot more to them. And if you care to, you might be able to find out what that is. So the fact that people are also movable, like you've probably changed your mind on something significant in your life, and to think about what those things are and how your mind was changed, what worked and what didn't. I can tell you that statistics, facts, shame, making people feel stupid, making people feel humiliated, is kind of the worst way to do it. So that's something to be really careful of. So calling people in to the future you want instead of calling people out for not getting it yet. That's number 2. Number 3 is to know what you're for and help people see it. So sometimes I can see this in myself. And please know that I'm on the journey too here, folks. I'm not that good at all this, but to amplify what I'm for more than react against what I'm against. Like because living in that perpetual reaction mode, it's not moving the cause forward. Play the long game of trust building. And I reworded this one. Persuasion is relationships, and relationships are trust, and trust takes time. So that's why I think it's also good to sort of measure the expectation. The expectation for this conversation is that we both walk away and we were glad we had the conversation, and we know we'll come back and talk again sometime. That's a more reasonable expectation than they totally understood everything I said. They agree with everything I want them to know. And now they're using all the right facts that I want them to have. Like, those are not reasonable expectations. But how did the conversation go? And can we come back to it? This one I think is very, very important, especially for those of us who spend time on social media. The blame for disinformation belongs to perpetrators and manipulators. It does not belong to victims and those who've been manipulated. So that means we make sure that we distinguish disinformation's victims from its powerful perpetrators, and we don't make the duped and manipulated feel stupid. Mm-hmm. And that includes ourselves. If we find that we've, suppose somebody shows us, we have been manipulated by some kind of, that can happen to anybody. And there will always be people who are interested in preying on the vulnerable and trying to manipulate. So better to be more interested in assigning the responsibility where it belongs on that. And then
Libby, I'm just going to interrupt you. Did you see Pastor Jennifer asked, can you give an example? Was that of that last one, the blame for disinformation piece? Yeah.
Oh, well, so what I'm thinking of is like on social media, when someone posts something that they think is true, and that it isn't. Either because of a fact checker or because, sometimes what I've done, which I would not do anymore, would be to post, well, here's the true version of that. But what that does is that makes them feel, first of all, it might make them dig in and refute my source. They don't agree with, so it's not just the fact they don't agree with, they don't even agree with the source itself. And so what I've come to do now is not post totally different information that can, and certainly no name call. This is, if you go on the chat board, people are terrible, people are ugly. They just say the worst, ugliest things. So that's what I'm saying is we would just not engage in that. We would just not say, how stupid are you for believing that crap? I can't believe you look at Breitbart. I can't believe you listen to MSNBC, whichever one it is. Just sort of don't do that. And instead, I would say something like, I've seen different information somewhere about that. Just sort of plant the seed that there's more to this than just what you're saying here. I've heard some other things about that. What, where did you see that? Or why is this important to you? If I care enough. That's the other thing. Social media really isn't the best place to have these conversations. But that kind of, and that may be where power differential comes into. People who are more educated talking to less educated, people who are positions of authority versus those who aren't. Just try not to make people feel stupid, I guess. Does that help? I don't know if that's that helpful. Just don't do it, Jennifer. And then the last one is he follows someone around who does what's called deep canvassing. And deep canvassing is very different than not deep canvassing. Have any of you ever canvassed politically, gone around to houses and talked to people, knocked on doors? Talk about courage. But typically you do that and you don't spend more than 5 minutes at a house. Because your goal is to get to a lot of people. Well, deep canvassing is you don't spend less than 30 minutes with each person. Yeah. And so he talks about these deep canvassing campaigns. And it is fascinating because what happens is they ask the first question and they just sort of get it's on a scale of 1 to 10, how they did it with the DACA campaign in Arizona and Flagstaff. And they went to over 72,000 homes. They won they won the thing. 72,000 people that they had conversations with. But he gives examples of these conversations where people would start out by saying, they don't even know any immigrants. And then they'd be like, oh, I guess my brother-in-law is an immigrant. But that came 10 or 15 minutes later in the conversation, because at first, their first reaction was not the truth, was not what's real in their actual life. But they don't think of their brother-in-law as an immigrant. They think of their brother-in-law as their brother-in-law. And so that conversation is sort of what kept just so opening, and the skill of the deep canvasser to keep a person thinking and talking, and the possibilities for people to move from where they are at the beginning of the conversation to where they are at the end. And I'm sure there's a lot that don't have all that wonderment, but the ones he shares just gave me a lot of hope. I'm like, people really are more complex, more movable than we think. And I think I fell prey to every effort there was in the past however many years to make Americans hate one another. And there were people actively trying to do that, both in this country and abroad. He does talk about the campaign to sow mistrust and animosity in the fabric of American life as part of the 2016 and 2020 election cycles. And I feel really duped and manipulated by that. Like, I kind of fell for it. And so now my resistance, the way I sort of push back against that trickery, is I refuse to lose hope in the possibility that who we are now, or who somebody is, or who I am, and that's that openness and that humility, is who I will and always be. We are not fixed. God is at work. And I think that is something we need to keep in mind as we're having any of these hard conversations, is that God is at work among us. So there, I'll stop at that one. It seems like a good note to end on.
Amen.
Yeah, that feels like a really powerful place to stop. So thank you, Pastor Libby, for just inviting us into this deep space. Clearly, even 90 minutes, like, we're just going to scratch the surface of this. We will post all the things that she sent me. There is, just so that you all know, there's things to know and do for intentional conversations using principles of nonviolent communication. That's a 2-page document that'll get posted with this video. There is the awkward conversations kind of script and outline that's got the 3 C's. It's got the 3 case studies we talked about tonight. So that's in one of the documents she's sharing with us. There's another document about the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban, and another handout about the How to Become a Better Persuader.
Yeah, that's the study guide that goes with the book. You can use it without the book too, but I really recommend that book. Read that. It has made me so happy, that book. I just can't even, I'm like, this guy.
Libby, will you very briefly share the thing that you shared with me earlier about what made you so happy, the whole thing about being a citizen here?
So I don't know about you, but I have felt some disillusionment with the American experience in recent years. I used to be somebody who I would say was generally patriotic, and now I have a hard time with that. But I want to be. I mean, that I haven't lost that desire. It's just that I'm really, I can't not see now what I see about how our history and how we have denied so much and caused pain. I mean, you just can't see what you can't see. So he starts his book talking about his own immigrant experience, and he's Indian. His family moved to the United States for a short time when he was very young, and then they moved to France and became citizens of France. And then they moved again and became citizens of the United States. So he has this weird multi-immigrant citizen experience, both in France and the United States. And he said, from where he's standing, he said, the United States, this experiment is still worthwhile. And he believes that because he said, my family became citizens of France, but we never made the mistake, nor did anybody want us to, of believing that we were French. So citizens of France, yes, but not French. And he said, but in the United States, when you become a citizen of the United States, you get to be an American. And he says, and I think that's still really unique and really powerful. And that's the world I want my kids to grow up in. So he just,
Wow.
And I said to Madeline, I said, that just made my little patriotic heart grow 3 sizes like the Grinch. Like, wow, there might be something here worth saving. And he thinks there is. And so I want to think that with him. He's made me a convert to his way of thinking without, so even as he's talking about being a persuader, I think he's an amazing persuader. he's employing everything he's talking about. So, yeah.
And when I find that I feel like giving up, and then I read the accounts of people of color or people who have immigrated, and they want to fight for the country, if they're proud to be here and they're fighting for the country, then I need to be about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, my brother Mun walked up from Vietnam to Thailand to get to a refugee camp, just to get to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That's through the jungle. So
yeah.
those stories are powerful, and it tells something about who we are as Americans too.
Mm-hmm. And that this is still the place people are trying to get into. I mean, this is so creating a path to citizenship, there's a really, one that actually works. It really matters to me.
Not for nothing, but I learned more about the Constitution by going to 14 citizenship swear-ins than I did in any of the U.S. Social study classes that I took.
Have you taken a citizenship test? They're hard.
No, but I helped my at least 3 of my brothers pass them. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not easy.
Yeah, maybe we should do that on a renewal basis.
So there's another workshop I do on Christian nationalism, where we talk about that. So if that's of interest to anybody. And then there is an event coming up. I just want to put this out there in early February. And most of the events that are happening, it's the Faith and Democracy Tour with Jen Butler, who is in charge, who was the founder of Faith and Public Life. This is being advertised on our Wisconsin Council of Churches outlets right now, but we're looking for sponsors. I'll be contacting Greater Milwaukee Synod soon. But she will be talking about, she has different events that are going to be around the Milwaukee and Madison areas in early February. And then there's one for pastors that'll be online on the Tuesday morning that she's here. So that's February 5th through 7th. And I'm so excited about what she will bring. So just wanted to plant that bug in your ear.
I love it. Well, as we wrap up, just again, a deep word of gratitude and a reminder for all of you that we'll continue these. The next one isn't going to be until January because we recognize that no one wants to do this on a Tuesday night between Christmas and New Year's. So in January, we'll gather for our next one. But the videos and resources, we always format these videos so they can be helpful in congregational settings. So like there's a screen that you can pause that says, ask this question. So if you find this a helpful conversation and you want to use the videos, just visit milwaukeesynod.org/curious. So again, Pastor Libby, thank you for your time tonight. And may we all hear each other's stories and then connect it with God's story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, friends. Bye-bye.